my end. You want to gavel us to order?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Well, Ivan Trevino, thank you so much for joining me. This is part two, by the way, for people who maybe didn't catch the first one. We left last podcast. We sort of messaged a bit afterwards about wanting to pick up where we left off and continued the conversation. We sort of, in an hour and a half, there's no way we're ever going to get to everything. And so I just want to say before we get into this one, I've had. I think when you messaged me, I immediately was like, because I've been alone all year, I went into anxiety mode. I was like, did I say something to make Ivan mad? Did I? I think I complimented him on his music. His music's awesome. Like what? And so we texted a bit, and I'm curious. I'm very excited to talk to you about today. But I want to just sort of picking up where we left off. How have you been thinking about the last week? Or was it a week and a half ago that we chatted?
Yeah, that's about right,
Okay.
Josh. I think it was a week and a half. And honestly, for me, man, like I felt really nice about our conversation. I felt like we talked about a lot of feelings that we've had about like for example, accountability
Mm-hmm.
and how we talk about that and how we address, people that we know, making a phone call versus having social media sort of conversations about
Right.
all of this stuff, But, I also left feeling regretful that we didn't talk more about and focus the conversation more on obviously systemic and structural racism
Mm-hmm.
and like how obviously like that encompasses so much of our lives. And I was thinking like, maybe a young musician who's just getting into so percussion or who's playing my music, they stumble upon our conversation, our first one, and maybe they're just sort of getting introduced to racism and how
Mm-hmm.
what that means to their life and to their friends' lives and to minority communities. And I didn't want them leaving the conversation thinking like, oh, like racism is complicated or I'm not sure how I feel. Like that's not what I would want them to leave with.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like our feelings about, how these things are talked about, there, those things, I think there's room for conversation, but like actual racism, the structural and systemic things
Mm-hmm.
that people of color deal with are like so real in every part of our lives again. And, like in terms of income inequality, in terms of the food we eat, in terms of the income gap, in terms of like hiring, policing, et cetera, et cetera. Like
Mm-hmm.
that stuff is totally real, and we didn't really address that topic. And like I heard somebody talking about this the other day, and I think there's some truth to that. Like whenever you're having these conversations, it's good to center the conversation around the people that are most harmed by some of these issues.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's true too, So not to take away from our convo or to feel like we shouldn't have talked about that. Like I totally feel like we should have. And that was actually very enlightening for me and nice for me just to open up about that stuff. And I think you probably felt the same
Mm-hmm.
way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but like I was struggling with how much of our own feelings we talked about versus a lot of these like bigger things that like we didn't really address as much.
Yeah. Well, I want to. I mean, this is where my own. When I say anxiety, it's not. That's not a thing that you need to worry about. Like that's my my own personal stuff. I think I do want to be very careful in these conversations to walk the line of things I think I have experience with, and then where I don't have experience with, I go back to the things that make sense to me, and then go from there. And in one-on-one conversations, like this market that we're, or the economy that we're having this, or sorry, the ecosystem we're having this conversation in, just allows for a lot more. Like I can sit here and go like, I don't know, I don't understand, I don't. But in social media, I think that's why I was expressing my fears about social media. Like that nuance is just way harder to get in the conversation. And so I apologize if anything I was saying about personal experiences I had felt like it was not. For me, it's just a way in. It's like I understand some of these topics. I'm never going to understand them fully. Clearly, I mean, you know, but there's. I think it's important for folks who don't have any idea what this stuff is to feel like they have an in somewhere. And I know that's a complicated thing to say because that allows for everybody to have input into how these conversations can go. And I'm immediately saying that's messy, but I'm curious for you when you say, I think I have an idea of what systemic issues can be. I've seen the way they manifest at like New York University or Princeton, and sort of, again, like I don't have an immediate identification in terms of my own personality as to like changing the name on a building or addressing hiring practices. Like those sorts of things are still foreign to me in a way. But I'm curious, when you say systemic racism, what exactly, and just spell it out for me, like for somebody who has no idea or thinks those words are stupid. Like I don't think those words are stupid at all. I agree with you 100%. But I think when it's often used as a blanket to describe why people don't understand something, and it's like, man, what do you mean when you say systemic racism in
Oh yeah,
particular?
sure. Well, I mean, first, like, and we talked about this too, like, I'm going to just offer my
Yeah.
opinion, and which is, like no expert opinion. It's just what I bring to the table. Um, but for me, it's how various things are structured to ultimately benefit or not benefit people of color, So, um, for example, like even our educational systems, it seems like because of taxpayer dollars, most often are going to the wealthiest communities to have the biggest and best sort of experiences for their students.
Mm-hmm.
And inevitably, the communities of color and the kids who grow up in those situations inevitably have less because of how those systems are put together and how they're funded. And that immediately creates inequality,
Mm-hmm.
which in turn, like, goes up the ladder, as these kids get older. They don't have the same experiences, the same educational experiences. And it sort of just creates a perpetual sort of recurring cycle of this thing, the
Mm-hmm.
system that inevitably repeats itself over and over again. Um, and like obviously that's a big issue, and not exactly sure how we fix it today. But that's one example. Also like mass incarceration
Mm-hmm.
stuff that happened in terms of the war on drugs, uh, that like inevitably affected people of color.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean, there's so many things to talk about. The food that we eat and the food that is available to us.
What's the
Um,
term? I think I heard this term for the first time a while ago, and it sort of like flew by me, but I didn't. Was it a food desert? I think is like um, places in the country where it's like where nothing grows, and it's really hard to get stuff there.
yeah,
And then what that means for those communities when, if it's just easier to put up a McDonald's, then over time that community, it's like you eat what it is that is brought to you oftentimes. And we as human beings don't go out to get our food that much anymore. Like you eat what you can walk and go get. And that means something for wealthy communities versus poor communities.
yeah, that's exactly right. That's totally true, man. Even hiring, it's still complicated today because there's so many people, like, a white person loses a job and it's so easy to say, oh well, it was a diversity hire or something. But like even bringing people of color to the table hasn't typically been a thing that has been a focus before. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I guess a lot of it goes back to even in classical music, and I think about this a lot, Josh, not just in terms of systemic racism,
Mm-hmm.
but kind of like the status quo inevitably um, holds back minority communities. Like in terms of programming, in terms of hiring, like so there has to be some focus about doing things differently to see changes happening. And there's a lot of schools of thought about how to do that. And some people even think like, well, if we did that, would we be sort of diminishing the level of our institution or
Mm-hmm.
something, But I think it's 2021, and like there's plenty of minority musicians who are just as capable to meet the demands and the level that an institution sets for itself, you know.
What?
So anyway, like I've been thinking a lot about status quo
Yeah.
as well.
Well, can I
And
ask?
that's it. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you. I mean, the things that you brought up here. Sorry, in the status quo. I just sort of. Sorry, I'm not ignoring you, Ivan. I'm making.
No, no, I know. I
just taking notes.
appreciate it,
Sorry,
Josh. That's awesome.
because I have a horrible short term memory, and I'll be like, so how about the Cleveland Browns? You know, like I'll totally forget what we're talking about. Public schooling, mass incarceration, and the status quo. And I feel like, if I'm all, just my instinct is always like Mr. It's like the Mr. Rogers, like be a helper. Like I don't understand a lot of things, but like to me when somebody says schooling, I'm like, okay, great, yeah, no, I agree, totally crazy. I lived in Scarsdale for 8 years, Scarsdale, New York. It's like one of the wealthiest school districts in the world. You can drive 10 miles south and be in the Bronx, and you have one school looks like Hogwarts in Scarsdale, and the other one looks like you could be in Iraq. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
not exaggerating here. Like that's not a it's true. Like it just like the feeling of it is like total chaos in one place. And granted, this is anecdotal. I'm talking about two places I've been. Like
Mm-hmm.
in that in Scarsdale, you have a ton of people, who are very wealthy, work in the financial district, live there, and so their tax dollars, property taxes, everything goes to that school district. If the same thing is happening to lower income families in these other areas, the argument about like charter schools comes into play. Like how, and I have a good friend of mine, Lou Huerta, does a lot. He works at Teachers College at Columbia, and he does a lot of writing around public policy and education. And he's been, and again, I'm not an expert in this, just when he talks about charter schools versus public school education, and these shared spaces that we have. To me, when I think of public schooling, I think that's where, like, I'm curious where you land on this stuff. What are your thoughts on charter schools? How do we restructure? I want to fix this stuff, but I don't know how to. And like I think it's one thing to say like this sucks, and it does, but like that education is, I think for me and maybe for you, where both of us have the most, like our hands are pushing against the actual box that needs to be moved somewhere in educate, like more so for me than mass incarceration or the drug war. Like that to me is a harder thing for me to tap into to try to affect, short of the way I talk about it. Yeah, I think marijuana should be legal. I think we shouldn't be incarcerating people for joints, like, but I have less of a say in that. I feel like whether or not that's true is another story. But I'm curious for public schooling, where does your head fall? Like, did you go through public school?
Yeah, I did. In Victoria, Texas,
Mm-hmm.
small town Texas, where I'm from, and it was crazy. Like I remember having going to like a marching band competition,
Mm-hmm.
and my school taking our little props with us and doing what we did,
Mm-hmm.
and then we're going up against these unbelievable Central Texas, Austin, Dallas
Like the
schools.
Death Star of marching band,
Oh my gosh. And like they had like machinery
They
on
had
the
like fully
field,
functioning cars and everything else on stage.
and like even aside from the issue, like even as a person of color who grew up in a poor community, like my we grew up I grew up in a trailer park for a while, um and like it's just it's shocking to see that kind of thing.
Hmm.
It's shocking to see like, wow, like there's another side of the spectrum that I didn't realize existed,
Hmm.
that does exist. But I think a lot of this stuff for me personally um gets alleviated at least a little bit if wealth can be distributed in a more equal way.
Hmm.
And I think we're slowly sort of getting there as a country. um but like I really do think that you know money plays a part in all of this stuff,
Hmm.
and if people can get a hold of more funding for stuff, including their personal stuff, then I feel like at least the system starts to rebalance a little
Hmm.
bit. And that's like a political thing, but I
Hmm.
think it plays right into this thing too.
Well, to me, like the older I get, the the more I feel like my beliefs and where the money can actually come from are starting to shift a little bit. Like I'm starting, there's trillions of dollars, billions, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars that go to the Pentagon for a
Hmm.
fighter jet. There was just, I read an article the other day about $1 trillion fighter jet that doesn't work.
Right.
Like I wondering the older I get whether or not it's going to be easier politically to pry loose $100 billion from the Pentagon than it is to pry loose even an extra $1,000 from every individual on a taxpayer basis. Like there's something weird that happens when people have their own personal money. Like I mean, when we talk about the public schooling, my high school in Dover, Ohio, very small rural high school, cannot pass a levy to save its life. And when it does a thing, and then those kids graduate, and then the next generation of people who don't have kids in school are like, hands out of my pocket. It's like, well, wait a minute. Like you do understand that my money paid for your kids to go to school, and
Yeah.
and so like it's just interesting to me that everybody seems to be okay with being like, well, we have this huge pile of money here, but as soon as somebody has to give up $100,
I know.
the argument gets, and I'm wondering whether or not that's true across. I mean, it feels like that's true across the socioeconomic spectrum. Whether you're talking to somebody who makes $1,000 a year or talking to somebody who makes $1 million a year, getting them to give that extra $100 is like, well, wait a minute. And I'm wondering why that is.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. Although I do like, for example, myself
Mm-hmm.
and my wife, like, um, from where I grew up and that amount of income to the life that we live now is way different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we're more than happy to give extra if that makes things fair.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there are people like that. Um, but I think you're right. Like there is a part of the population that no matter how much money that they make, they feel like they're not entitled to share that with anyone.
Well, it's like it's the weird American dream thing, right? Like, I'm not endorsing that. Just to be clear, I'm just trying to like think. It's the friction I run up against when I talk to, family of mine who don't maybe they haven't spent the time I've spent with minority communities, and they don't understand that. Like, it's still a mystery that my friends get pulled over more than me. Like, there's a weird like I can't get them to believe me, and I don't understand why I can't get them to believe. There's just because they've never experienced it themselves. People are more inclined. It's just more stressful to engage with that.
I know, and Josh, this goes back to uh, systemic and structural racism within education.
Mm-hmm.
like you mentioned last time on the podcast, like your friends um, who are from your sort of Midwestern part of the country, they view racism maybe differently, that term,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of somebody else. And I get what you mean, and I think I understand what they would say too. It's like there's very overt, obvious racism.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody in a Klan hat chasing black people around or whatever it is, like.
Which
But then
sadly
there's
still
also
exists, unfortunately.
what's
Which
that?
sadly still exists, unfortunately.
Absolutely, yeah. But then I think there's also obviously racism that is layered, and that goes to our points and what
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about. And for some reason, our education system doesn't talk about those things. We don't address systemic racism so that people can view it from even a non-personal place, but
Mm-hmm.
just like something that historically has happened. And that's really important. Until we get to that point, I think you're going to keep getting people who, like you mentioned, who you're just going to run up against these thoughts like, well, that's never happened to me. And I feel like at least if we had a perspective, an educational perspective on these issues, it might enlighten them
Mm-hmm.
as to how real these issues are. Now, there's a lot at play there. Like, how do we get to that point where we can openly talk? Like,
Yeah.
even the Trump administration, like they were axing, what's the project? There's the 16,
1619 project.
yeah, they were like already sort of in conflict with teaching that in schools. Um, And like, so that, I think that's a long ways away, but like that ultimately is just one other example of how it's going to be hard for us to advance in these things if we're not all seeing it the same way,
Yeah,
which is like which is a fact-based statistical way to see it.
I
It's
mean,
just people don't want to go there because it's harmful to the psyche of white folks, obviously, and the systems that they live in.
yeah, I mean, I was in grad school lamenting to my friends that John Cage only got one page out of the music history book, and then I go back and I look at other history books and I see that slavery only got 4 pages, you know, and I'm like,
Dude,
we're talking
yeah.
about 400 years of history, and I went to I feel like every living, breathing American, no matter what age you are, and I say American specifically because this should be required. There should be government funding to give everybody a free ticket to the Smithsonian, the African History Museum in DC. The one that like you go down into the basement, you take an elevator down, and you see the like. Have you been there before? Have you checked it out?
uh,
Oh my
no, I've
God,
never
Ivan!
been.
It is like one of the most horrifying and beautiful experiences I think I've ever had. Like you get in this elevator and it's just set up so perfectly, and you get in, you go down, and you see the time ticking back like 1812, 1793, and you get down to 1619, and you get off the elevator and you go by Emmett Till's grave, you go by or casket. You see the video of his mom talking and forgiving the people who killed him, but demanding
Right.
that his casket be open so everybody see what they did to her boy. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and it's one thing to read about. This is my thing with like the reading of a book, and then you've now it's like there's one thing to read about that story, and then there's another thing to see the actual casket, to see the stains on the sheets, to hear his mother. And you keep walking, and then you get up, and you walk up all of these floors. By the time you get to the fifth floor, you're at like Bootsy Collins and Aretha Franklin. And you see, it is just such a comprehensive. You can't possibly go through there and walk out and be like, well, it wasn't so bad. Slavery wasn't so. Like, there's no way. I don't care who you are.
Right.
But
That's it.
it's.
That's I think that's exactly right, Josh. It's like having those educational experiences to teach us about these things. And that's hard for people to accept. Like it's part of our history, and
Mhm.
like it shouldn't be celebrated, obviously, but it should be studied, and like even like everybody's on a different spectrum with Joe Biden, right? Like
Mhm.
there's moderates who love him, there's progressives who are like, oh, he's doing okay, and like and then there's people who are like, I don't like him
He's
at
not
all, and
setting
they're
my
like,
yeah. He's not setting my hair on fire every day, so he must be okay. Like
right,
there's that extreme too.
sure. But even him, he's used language in the past like, oh, this isn't who we are, this isn't, and like in terms of addressing these systemic racism issues, but like in a way, like this has been who we've been, and maybe it's okay to talk about it in that way,
Mm. I think it's totally appropriate to say that's who we were, and we don't know where we're going, or we have a hope to where we're headed. Where we are is not a fixed point in space, and it's certainly not done. Like we are
Mm-hmm.
not done. Like this idea, just because slavery ended, everybody's like, what? Like, well, wait a minute. What do you mean what? Like, do you understand the impacts of the Civil War? Do you understand why things in the South, why systems, and just like, forget about like what slavery did specifically to a population of people. Zoom out even further and look at why things function the way they do in the South, because systems were set up that had to be dismantled by the North, and it's that's only like 1.5 people ago that even happened. And so like you have to look at the what food has developed in a particular area of the country. Why is barbecue what it is? Like all of this stuff is connected. This is not. These aren't. You pull one thread and the whole thing keeps unwinding because it's all tied together.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Josh. You're totally right. I mean, even for me, like my grandfather in Texas was denied service,
Mm,
to
yeah.
go eat somewhere, etc. Like, and my name Trevino, it should have an Enye, but like generations ago, my family took it off so that they could assimilate, so people might think that they're Italian and not
Is
Mexicano, right?
is that common? Is it common in the Hispanic community? And am I say when I say Hispanic community, is that the proper brush to be painting with, or should I? Is there like, or is it
I,
Latino? Like,
I,
I want to be careful here.
I think Hispanic is like Spanish speaking.
Okay, so
I
that's a
think.
lot of people. That's like another
Yes, I
continent,
think.
you know, like
Yeah,
to,
exactly. For the sake of this conversation, you could probably just say like Mexican or Tex-Mex,
okay,
and
all
I
right.
would know what you mean. Um, but I don't know if that's actually common or not. I'm not sure, but I've seen like documents from my family that had it before, and I
Hmm.
remember talking to my dad about it. And he said, "Yeah, like once where our family lived became Texas and not Mexico, there was a lot of um, a lot of violence and a lot
Mm-hmm.
of just general racism against the people that were there before."
Well, can I ask you one of the things that, as you were talking, like I want to, I have had a bit of a the issue I see sometimes in our field is this. There's a lot of effort being made to make the white spaces more diverse. There's, but there's no effort. I don't want to say there's no effort. There's the initial instinct isn't for the white spaces to learn more about black spaces by or BIPOC spaces by going into them, and in the instant in spending really investing in spending time, you know, maybe that means going to play in a steel band, maybe that means going to join Brazilian batucada ensemble, and maybe you're not going to mine it for all of its like cultural value that you can go back, but you're just going to participate. And I'm curious for you, like what are you noticing on your side of things? Do you feel like I feel like there's a big sucking sound on the white side of things being like, come over here so our spaces can be more diverse. But there's not a whole lot of effort to be like, I think if I was living next to you, I would be like, Ivan, can you just take me to a place where no one speaks English and everybody plays awesome guitars and accordions and no one's going to pay attention to me. They'll smile to me and they'll be totally lovely. But that's what I would want to go be a part of. And I'm curious if my instinct is like, what am I missing? With that viewpoint, what am I missing?
Well, I don't know, but I do think that classical music has sort of this saviorism personality, right? Like we're going to go into the inner city schools and we're
Mm,
going to play Bach and Beethoven, and this is like this is the supreme kind of music, and we're going to really show these kids, what it sounds like and what it is to hear this, sort of glorified music.
mm-hmm.
um and that's not it. Like
Well,
I don't
it's
think.
awesome, but you could also be like, you know why Bach's awesome? Because he was a lot like Miles Davis. You know, like
Sure.
there's ways to do that where you can put the emphasis on Miles Davis rather than on Bach. Not that Bach is bad. It's just
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I think if you're only coming at it from that sort of purist
mm-hmm,
classical music mindset, that's not like a healthy approach to outreach.
mm,
um I think that the problems, Josh, with this whole thing, and I think what you bring up is totally valid, but it speaks to, again, the education of classical music.
mm.
Like, we study what we study, and that has become like church.
Right, right.
um and and like I feel like in the last 30-40 years, like hip hop and rap, for example, have become like one of the most important American genres of music. And like, if you try to theorize it from a classical perspective, you're gonna you'll get people who say like, oh well, it's not music, there's hardly any chord changes, et cetera, et cetera.
Miles Davis again. I'll just go ahead and bring up Kind of Blue. Go ahead.
Right.
If many chord changes are what is your sort of litmus test. Okay, fine. I'm gonna call that's. I got one lick to get to the center of your Tootsie Pop. If that's your argument.
That's what. Yeah, you're right. But I feel like the way that the system is structured to just focus on this sort of Western classical
Mm-hmm.
music um, affects how outreach is done, and it affects how diversity is done. And I think there's this big debate in the classical community, and I've had it with different professors and teachers, like who you are as an institution versus um, what you want your experience, your school experience to be like, who
Hmm.
you want to be there, who
Hmm.
you want to have at the table. Um, and for me, I think part of that does involve uh, examining our curriculum
Hmm.
and altering it and adding to it and changing it so that we incorporate more music that in its very nature incorporates more people of color, you know.
Hmm.
And maybe that's sort of an aside from your original sort of question, but that's sort of what I always think about when it comes to diversity and bringing people to the table, because that would, like to your point, would almost necessitate a white student to have an experience
Hmm.
in a non-white sort of music form. And I don't know what that curriculum would look like. You could get so broad with it. Like obviously, like there's another half of the world that entirely almost gets overlooked in our community too, right?
Hmm.
Um, so like where does that fit into the equation, and like representation for that, you know, those genres of music too? Like I just think there's a way to restructure the whole thing.
Hmm.
um Obviously, like here's another thing I've been thinking about, and I'm not sure this is a white problem, but this is a status quo problem. Like classical music has like it's always been this way, but I think it's really becoming this way. It's like it's a charity in some respects, you know, like it's not a self-sustaining system anymore.
What do you mean by
I
that?
feel
Can you drill
well,
down?
I just mean like I feel like, you know, and this has been discussed for decades, but like, and obviously pandemic, like this is, we can't judge this by the pandemic, but you know, audience attendance at orchestra concerts, orchestras folding, like all the whole thing has sort of been trending downward, in terms of how viable these systems are and how they operate, you know. And that's a tough conversation to have, and I'm not sure how to fix that. But whatever we've been doing has not been working, and that includes the curriculum, because the curriculum in itself feeds those systems, you know.
Hmm.
So perhaps reevaluating the curriculum would then hopefully create an ecosystem that might be more viable. And I don't just mean monetarily, like I just mean like culturally more viable to more people, you know, and not just
Yeah.
have a specific demographic of an audience that will go to your concert, you know, 55 and older, typically white, etc.
Hmm.
Um, these are all like super
Yeah.
broad issues,
No,
but
I mean, these are important, and to me, I agree with you 100% on everything you're saying about the sort of the way the college curriculum is structured. And I've been hearing when I was a student in 1999, I heard everybody whispering about orchestras folding, and it's the death of orchestras. And now it's like 22 years later, there's been a few orchestras that have folded. A lot of orchestras, Philly Orchestra had financial problems a couple of years ago. Obviously, the thing is, it's like it's just a big ensemble. Like it just takes a lot of money. It's a very vulnerable ensemble when a crisis hits. It's too big to fail. They're like the Bank of America of like the investment bank of the music world is the orchestra. And my problem has been, I think I don't want to take issue with what you said, but you said something about like the system has failed us. And actually, I think the system has done exactly what it set out to do, which was create a shitload of orchestra percussionists. And only talking about percussion education right now, but I think there was an article in the Times about Juilliard grads that are like 11% of them or something are getting work outside of school. And like when you're charging that much money, what are you doing? Like what is your job there as an institution? We've trained a ton of orchestra positions, and that's why when there's an orchestra audition at Chicago Symphony, 900 people apply, and they only let in 20, and those people they didn't even have to audition. There's like the system now is too big to get an orchestra job, and I'm curious how much of that, like I was discouraged from going to the orchestra world and I'm a white guy, like because I saw it and I was just like, fuck no. Are you kidding me? That is the most discouraging path I could ever imagine going down. Do I love playing an orchestra? Yeah. Mahler 2 is awesome. I love it. Big fan. But I knew I was not willing to jump through those hoops. Teaching at a college is the same thing. The system that we have to get people doctoralized or whatever it is to knighted to be able to teach at a university with tenure, with health insurance. I was like, nope. I don't have the money. And I come from, middle class family, but it's like, no, hell no. And like, if I'm having that reaction, then of course, shitloads of other people are having that reaction for various reasons. I got to make a choice. Other people don't even get to look at that situation and be like, I wonder what I'll do. you know,
Right.
and I think that's what you're addressing here. But to me, it's like I'm agreeing with you. The system excludes a lot of people, but it's a system built to sort of funnel people to the orchestra. Whereas if we built things to funnel, and I don't even know. Like, what is it? Sorry, I'm not formulating a question
No,
here. Just you've really prodded a lot of thinking for me. Go ahead.
This got me thinking. Like, I feel like perhaps a system that just enabled creativity and that sent creatives out into the world and not necessarily like place them in jobs. Like, even in pop music, there's no jobs per se. Just like, I mean, there are, but like they're not like readily available for all of us to have.
Turn to the classifieds and look for like Taylor Swift jobs.
Yeah,
like they don't exist.
No, exactly. But if you enable creatives and send creatives out into the world, then maybe they will do creative things that will then self-sustain themselves, and honestly, perhaps create a much larger impact in communities than maybe a typical orchestra might, who again typically only sees one kind of demographic of audience member.
Well, how do we? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say my internet connection is unstable, and I don't know why, but I'm just letting you know that.
Okay, it's fine on my end. So I mean, I don't notice anything from you on the internet side, but
perfect.
I'm curious, like, what do we do? I mean, this is what do you do when a parent comes to? Okay, so let's make our school. Ivan and Josh, you get to go first. Well, your name, you can go first. Ivan and Josh's creative institution. Like, I've had enough comfort. I'm sure you have too. Like, how do you convince somebody to pay you without any promise of a result on the other end, other than creative prowess? Which I agree with you on, but you're giving someone a product, and how do we sell that?
I mean, we sell it already in classical institutions. Like, it's not like there's any jobs available, really.
Except,
I guess
we tell people there are.
Sure,
maybe we should
I think they're learning now. Through everything that's coming out, like you said, just the Times article. It's like none of that is true anymore. I guess you could go to a school where their statistics are better.
I mean,
but I don't know. I think it's the same as, going to school for photography or going to school for acting, for example. Like, sure, you could find a job with a sort of acting group, etc. But it doesn't necessarily come with the territory. But I think that's knowing what you're getting into. Like, you have to be okay with that. Like, I think that's fine. And like, maybe that's a privileged thing for me to say. I'm not sure, but I do think that there's creatives out there, and there's very wealthy musicians who might be willing to fund projects or schools like this versus put their money in an institution that has been doing the same thing for 200 years.
No, I totally agree. And I wonder, like, I mean, as you were talking, like, the number of times I was told in my undergrad, and I don't mean this as like a value judgment on my teachers. I think it was just part of like I remember my teachers being terrified that I'd never work, and like sensing palpable guilt in the way they spoke to me, like fear that they had an obligation to me to get me a job. And I remember thinking, like, I appreciate that, but I don't know why you think that I require that of you, but whatever, you know, and I went on about my day.
Yeah, that's a great point, Josh. I sort of feel like we have set up a system where we view having a day job or doing normal people things
Hmm.
outside of music is like bad. Like, oh, you went to school for this and now you have a normal job. Like, why did you do that? But like, it doesn't have to be that way. I think you can be very happy going to school and studying music and then coming out and working a day job and doing music when you can. And then if it turns into something that's wonderful, like that, each person has to take their own sort of their level of comfort with that. I'm not sure that I'm not sure. I don't know. This is the debate about going to college for a job or going to college for the experience. And I kind of feel like there's a middle ground in there too. But um, I think we have to be okay with that too as teachers. Like ultimately, somebody's pursuit of their journey and
Hmm.
finding happiness is up to them.
I've always tried to just look at my students and be like, what? I mean, because, and again, as a reaction to some of the way I was taught, you know, and Bob at Yale was one of the people who I sensed that palpable fear in most. Um, and you know, some of it I don't want to be just, some of it may have been, you know, his own desire to, you know, it's recruiting. I mean, I'm sure Todd thinks about this. It's like the number, if Todd never put out a student who ever had any work in the music field over, you know, 15 years or whatever teaching at Baylor, like eventually people are going to be like,
Well,
what do you do
what's
here? You
interesting
know?
about the Texas scene,
Mm,
and I think in many ways the public education music scene in Texas sort of is cyclical.
yeah, yeah,
So, like a lot of his students might end up teaching in public school, and there's such a demand
yeah.
for public school education. So, in that sense, like at least Todd students will probably, find something within music because of the public education in
Right.
Texas. But like, that's a good question. I would be curious to ask
But
Todd
it,
that, what his thoughts would be.
but that perception has even changed. I mean, I think it's more acceptable now for a student to go into music education and that be seen as a valid career path in the percussion studio world. You know, when I was in school, there were the performance majors, and then there were what's called the atrium dwellers, which were all the music ed majors who hung out in the atrium of the music school, you know, just chatting, never practicing. And it was like, oh, if are you an atrium dweller or are you a performer? And I was like, I don't know. I love teaching sixth grade band. They're kind of like my favorite. Wouldn't that be kind of what you want me to do, doing a thing that I really enjoy? And now I think 20 years later, I think that perception may be a little bit deflated and it may be more acceptable. But
I think you're totally right. And I have even switched my mindset in terms like people often and still ask me like, what is it, what does it mean to make it? Or like, what does that
mm,
mean? And like in my past, I remember saying stuff like, if you can do anything in music, whether it's teaching or writing or playing, like that's making it. And I still agree with certain parts of that, but like, at the end of the day, like if you go through college and you end up finding another career path and finding joy in that, like that's making it too. Maybe it's not making it in music per se, but it's certainly like, finding yourself and your purpose in whatever you end up doing.
I think in my reaction against I think I reacted against like Bob and some of my teachers in the like job thing of like, I saw the fear and the anxiety it gave them. So I know, and then two things is like, well, I don't want that. I don't want to have that sort of monkey on my shoulder every time I come into a lesson with a student. And B, I can't. I have zero power. I'm an adjunct and I play in a percussion quartet. Like I don't
Mm-hmm.
like maybe my power. I'm not aware of my power, but like I don't actually. I still am trying to get gigs. Like so, I'm going to be disingenuous here. I'm teaching you how to play in a steel band or chamber music or whatever. I have zero interest in you becoming a professional steel drummer because, quite frankly, I can barely figure that out. What I have an interest in is you being a representative of me in the future. Meaning, if you go into accounting or you go into open an animal shelter, if I find out that you're being an asshole at those places and you're hard to work with and you don't care what other people are doing around you, you know what that is? That's being a bad chamber musician. And I've taught you how to do that. And so you're just
Mm-hmm.
actively ignoring all the things I taught you, and I will never write you a letter of recommendation. If you want me to later write a letter of recommendation to your animal shelter, that's easy. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I can do that. And that's what I'm here for. I can't promise you that you're going to run a steel band someday or you're going to run a percussion studio because I just can't. Like, that's,
Yeah, I know. And that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself as an educator too. I feel like some educators do that,
mhm.
and they, and God bless them for trying to go to bat and find a job for every single student that they have. That's nice. Um, but that's can be heavy.
Well,
That can be heavy.
and it's part of, I mean, I've had some things happen this week in terms of like where what is my responsibility as an educator? Where do my ethics lie? How do my ethics and my educating overlap? And where do I know what hill am I going to die on as an educator? And this week there were a couple hills that that popped up for me, and I actually don't feel super comfortable because it's a little private for my colleague, but like talking about him here, but where it popped up and I was like, oh, I'm actually willing to throw it all away because of something that is stupid and like is a dumb little thing. What what do I do here? I don't. Oh no. Like and I, as an educator, I like, what's my responsibility? How do I teach a student about racism? How do I teach them about comments that are made that they have no idea how much of an effect it had on somebody, but because of that particular comment to a particular person, it sends them into a spiral. Like, what's my what are
What's
my
your role? What's your role in that?
what's my
Right.
role in that? And I found myself getting very defensive of my friend who I've known for 12 years and becoming very angry and kind of shutting down and then kind of moving on. And genuinely feeling like I need to stand up for my colleague, my friend who I love and is a family member of mine. On the other hand, I got to be careful not to burn something down that because of something that somebody had no clue what they were saying, you know? And I don't think I have the answer yet. Like, I think it may be a conversation I need to have with them in the fall. Like, I don't know. Like, it just,
Mm-hmm.
like, I made the call not to have that conversation now. And I don't know whether I made the right call, but
I think yeah, I don't know, but I know how you feel. I've been even recently in similar sort of situations where like ultimately the thing that has given me peace is just getting space,
hmm,
having space from it,
mm-hmm,
like even recently, like I sort of invested myself and my brain power into a particular thing that like I don't know why I did. I think it's because I was close to the people, like you said,
mm-hmm.
it's like it becomes family. But it can get heavy the more you invest in something as complicated as some of those issues, and like maybe space is just the best.
Yeah, but man, space is hard. I mean, it was a moment where I genuinely felt like I didn't do the right thing, that I needed to apologize to my colleague, but I also, but anyway, as an educator, I think, well, first of all, I appreciate you letting me be vulnerable about this stuff and just having
Yeah.
these conversations. Because for me, I think education, we talked about this a bit last time. Education is kind of where it's easy to staple leaves to the tree and be like, look, the tree's different now. You got to replant the tree, bro. Like, like
Hmm.
the tree, we planted this tree hundreds of years ago, and things grew the way they did because of the specific water that was getting poured on the roots. Well,
Mm-hmm.
we've realized now that there's hundreds of other types of water that need to be watering that root so that it looks more organic. And so what do? Do you tear the whole tree out? That's a painful process. Like, a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people are going to get alienated, are going to be upset. A lot of people are going to be happy. I think it's not an unhealthy thing to think about, but it's like that. I felt like I wanted to pull the tree out by the root the other day and just be like, I'm going to set it on fire in the backyard and start over in 5 years. But I actually felt like that would have done more harm than good in that moment,
Sure.
But
I know it's hard. Um, it is hard, Josh. I still, from our last convo, we talked a lot about sort of reforming things
Hmm. Hmm.
versus, abolishing them and starting fresh, right? And that is tricky, and it becomes trickier when you're involved,
Hmm.
but like, and I guess this goes back to the beginning of our conversation today. It's like last time we talked a lot about our feelings,
Hmm.
but sometimes our feelings can sort of eschew just the matter of fact things that are happening,
Yeah.
um and like, yeah, I totally know how you feel though, man. It's not easy.
Well, I mean, this is the thing my therapist is on me all the time about. It's like your feelings aren't proof of anything. Like, just because you have that anxiety, that's not proof that it's your anxiety is founded in anything. Like you're
Mm-hmm.
reacting to something, and so like take a step back and look at whether or not you're reacting appropriately. And I think a couple days ago, I found that I was not.
Mm-hmm.
I jumped to anger and defensiveness, and that's not doesn't do anybody any good. But it's I well, what do you? I don't know if we solved anything today, buddy. Like,
No, I don't
and
think
I don't.
that wasn't, I wasn't hoping to.
Yeah. Well,
But
I
I
don't.
like,
Yeah.
part of, again, why I wanted to talk. And Josh, maybe we think about how these episodes run together. Like maybe we run this first, or I don't know,
Yeah, I'm loose.
but I think part of me again wanted to make sure that we at least spent time on focusing the convo on some of those systemic and structural issues, because I feel like, I don't know, I left also feeling like, just like, not disappointed in myself, but maybe a little bit like, man, we should have talked about that more. And that
Mm.
wasn't on you, it was on me too. Like, this is an open conversation, and I felt like I wanted to talk about my feelings a lot,
Well, I
but I
mean,
didn't necessarily get to talk about the important stuff.
yeah. Well, I appreciate you saying all that out loud, and this is exactly why I started this podcast. Is because I value heavily conversations that are 50-50. Like, yes, this is my podcast. Yes, I started it. Of course, you could feel like, well, whatever. No, like I don't like having conversations that are one-sided. I don't like having conversations that are me just rattling off shit I think. I'd like you to be like, "Well, I don't know about this thing. I wonder if we could look at this from a side angle." Like that's important to me, and I don't think either one of us owes anybody else an apology except for each of us. Like, Ivan, I will take 50% responsibility for us not covering things last time, as long as you take
and,
the other
and
50%, and then
and I think you're right too, Josh. Like, there's only so much to cover in a little amount of time, and there's totally a lot of truth to that. But I do think, and this is a good, maybe something somebody needs to hear this out there. But to go back to your point about our feelings,
mm-hmm.
it's like, last time I talked a lot about my feelings about these things. And like, I think that just sort of, by the time I got done, I realized, like, oh my gosh, like, how did I not address these sorts of issues that people who are harmed by them deserve to have addressed? Like, that's the issue here. um and I just appreciate you giving me a little more space to do that, and to do it with me too.
Well, the space is always there. I mean, if you want to have parts 3, 4, 5, 6, and we end up doing part 172 3 years from now, like I don't care. Like to me, the other thing I think I want folks to understand, if someone listened to our part one, and if anybody listened to anything I said and they're like, well, that's his fixed position. It's never been different, and it never will be different. You're wrong. You're just wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong. Your perceptions of my conversational style are not proof that that's who I am. I changed my views on stuff are different because I talk to you. They're different because I talk to Todd. They're different because I talk to Kendall. I want to say things out loud to see the look on your face, to know like, oops, that's let me jerk the wheel a little bit back on the road. I'm on the berm now, and that was because you and I had a back and forth. And your feelings are important. Again, they're not proof of anything, myself included, but like I don't know who you are unless you tell me how you feel. And then we can start to like graft on, we can put the societal weight on both of our shoulders once we both know where we both stand. And so I feel like the progression of this conversation, I would lobby is the way people should have conversations, which is like get to know somebody. And then when that person says, "Can we talk about this other thing deeper?" Say yes. And be nervous about it. Like I was nervous all week, Ivan. I thought I said something incredibly racist or like,
No,
and I was
no,
like, oh my
no.
God, is he going to come to the table? Like, listen, I don't know you that well. I rely heavily on loyalty and my friends sort of vouching for people. And so when somebody says Ivan's a good guy, I'm like, okay, and so I trust you implicitly. So I don't know why I was having any sort of like, weird moments, but I think this is important, and I'm grateful to you for being willing to do it. I know that a lot of people don't want to have these conversations because you can get to spots where neither person knows what to say next, and then usually me says the awkward thing, and and so anyway, I think this is a good demonstration for folks on just how to have a conversation. They don't have to have it the same way. They don't have to come to the same conclusions. They can have it completely differently, but at least use this as a like if you're modeling your marimba playing after someone you saw play marimba, then model your conversational style after Ivan Trevino and Josh Quillen, who are two lovely people who just like to talk to each other. You don't have to do it exactly like us, but we're showing you a few ways in how to do it, and so that's what I think is important.
That's awesome. Thank you, Josh, so much, man. I appreciate it.
Well, before we let you go, is there any, I mean, I know it's only been like a week and a half, but is there any updates on your music or anything else that we should know that you've been sort of chewing away at over there?
Well, I took some time off from music after I finished that book of 4.3 duos for marimbas, the ones that we talked about last time that you heard Emily from University of Kentucky playing with Jamie.
Is it Emily Salgado? No, she's in Michigan. Sorry. Sorry, there's a lot of Emilys that I.
Yeah. Oh shoot, I'm totally blanking.
Which I think I told you the last podcast that I liked it better with two different people than just with you.
Yeah, you were like, you suck, Ivan, but the other two are good.
Maybe that's the thing I was worried you were going to hold me to.
No, man, I did not think
Ivan,
about
it sounds
that
much better when two different people play.
No. But so I took some time off, but just recently I started up again, and I got a couple of things going, but one is working on a project with my friend Colleen Bernstein. Do you know Colleen?
I know Colleen. We've met once, I think, but I don't know her super well.
She's awesome, man. She's a good friend of mine, and we're working on an arrangement of this tune by a singer-songwriter from Mexico. Her name's Natalia Lafourcade. She's like super famous in Mexico, and she's done a lot of different kinds of music. She's done like culturally sort of like focused music. She's done pop rock. She's amazing. So we're going to arrange one of her tunes for like singing and a bunch of percussion instruments. And then the other thing that I have to start working on is I'm writing a piece for the Eastman Wind Ensemble.
Whoa.
For they're having a big centennial celebration this concert season. And then they asked me to write a piece, and I'm going to write a piece for me and my former teacher, Michael Burrett, sort of like a double concerto for us to play together with the ensemble.
Well, writing for the Eastman Wind Ensemble, I mean, that's like if you were going to write for every tabernacle choir and you got to choose the Mormon tabernacle choir, like you've got the Eastman Wind Ensembles, like they're some of the OGs, right? Like that's a big.
Yeah, it's really cool, man. I feel very honored to be doing it, obviously. And I played in the ensemble when I was in school too, and I sort of know the history of it. And I think it's cool that they asked me to they know how I write and they know the kind of music that I play. And I'm sure it will be different than typical wind ensemble music, but I think that's why they asked me to do it, and to get Michael to play it with me. Like, he's a very special person to me and has been a mentor, and now we're good friends. And we have a lot of conversations like you and I have about all sorts of stuff. He's that kind of guy too. But anyway, to write something and to play it with him is going to be awesome.
Barrett is one of those people. I'm getting old enough now where I feel like I can say this because he's a colleague and I've had enough whiskey with him where I feel okay to share this. But like in grad school, just because teachers are competitive, I remember Barrett came to give a master class and he played for us in a master class, and I was just like, oh come on. Like, I was so judgmental, and I didn't know him. I was studying at Yale with Bob, and I'm over here like, blah, 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 and Bert came in and did played something. I remember he coached us on Village Burial with Fire, and I remember being just being a dumb, like I was 22 years old. I didn't know my ass from a hole in the ground. And then meeting him later and getting to know him and just love him dearly and see the support he gives to his students and to So and to all these things, it was, I've apologized to him since. So
totally. He is that kind of teacher. Like for me, definitely some of the tipping points in my career directly involve him, Eastman, him programming my music at PASIG, etc. Like he's very special to me. And yeah, man. And you're right. Like I remember I studied with John Beck, and then I took some time off and studied with Mike, and it was like polar opposites. I remember going to a lesson, my first lesson with Mike, and playing something. I don't remember what I played, and like JB would be like, "Oh yeah, it sounds good. Try this," And like Mike was like, "All right, we got to do this. We got to do this." And I was like, "It doesn't sound good." He's like, "Nope, not yet. It doesn't." And it was like completely. I've talked about this before, but almost different coaching styles. Like Phil Jackson, JB, hard nosed Mike Ditka. Not that quiet, but you know what I mean? Mean, like just like super energetic. And it was cool. It's cool to get both sides of that spectrum.
Yeah. No, I've told Bob stories many times. My undergrad teacher, Larry Snyder, is very just like one of my heroes in life. Just always just like, have you checked this out? Have you checked this out? Have you checked this out? Look at this. Look at this. Look at this. And so like every lesson was basically that. I'd play something. He'd be like, yeah, buddy, but have you checked out this? And it was always very encouraging. And I took one timpani lesson with Bob my first week at Yale, and he was like, you're never going to play in an orchestra. You know that, right? And I was like, huh? And he's like,
really?
You're never going to win an orchestra job with that timpani playing. And he's like, I just got Todd Meehan, and I didn't know who Todd was at the time. He's like, I just got Todd Meehan a job. I just got Javi Alonso. And he's like, I know what it takes, and you're never going to win one. And he's like, so we got to make a call. Do you want to play bat mitzvahs on steel drums, or do you want to take orchestra auditions? I was like, well, I'll play bat mitzvahs on steel drums easy. And he was like, okay, then we're done studying timpani, in terms of like the level to get orchestra jobs. But it was like, I appreciated his sort of blunt honesty. He wasn't wrong. I just didn't understand why he wasn't wrong in that moment. But
yeah, and Mike is similar in that respect. He will definitely be honest with you in a good way.
Have you started smoking crystal meth in order to keep up with him on the marimba?
No, like I think that's the side of JB that I have adopted.
Okay, all right.
So when Mike and I play together, I feel like yin and yang. Like it's just it has that kind of vibe, which is good.
When he says, what tempo do you want to do it at? Do you always say like, whatever tempo you play, Mike?
I always say like 10 clicks slower than you think we should.
All right. Well, Ivan, I really appreciated this part 2. And again, like doors always open. I'll be in touch whenever I get these edited and we're ready to launch. So in the meantime, stay healthy. And I really hope to come to Texas and see you all in person sooner than
I would
later.
love that. Dude, hopefully soon. Okay.
All righty. All right. Stay healthy.
Brother.
We'll
good to see you, man.
Likewise.
Cheers.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. This podcast is brought to you by Liquid Drum, liquiddrum.com down in Waco, Texas. My good friend Todd Meehan runs an amazing percussion company down there. Great merch, great content. Check him out, liquiddrum.com. Also, Kyle Dunleavy, dunleavypans.com, DUNLEAVY pans.com. Kyle Dunleavy makes and builds all the steel drums that I perform and teach on in So Percussion, as well as at NYU and Princeton. He's an amazing tuner, builder, just a really nice guy, very dependable. Check him out. If you are interested at all in steel pan advocacy, want to learn more about the goings-on in pan in Brooklyn, check out paninmotion.com. My good friend Kendall Williams, Jerry Guy, Trisha Guy, and Arisha John run an amazing organization called paninmotion.com. Check them out. And finally, Alejandro Mirage runs an amazing clothing apparel company in Brooklyn that is steel pan centric. You can check him out at mangochow, CHOW, clothing.com. I own a bunch of his shirts. They're amazing, very stylish, beautifully made. Check them out. mangochowclothing.com. Okay, hope you're well. Talk to you soon. Bye.